Well, good evening. My name's James Daveson. I'm a gastroenterologist at Wesley Research Institute. And welcome to the Wesley Research Celiac Disease webinar series. This is the third of our webinar series. And thank you all for attending today. The aim of these webinar series is to connect clinicians, researchers, the community, and our supporters to bring them together on the latest research, insights, and clinical tips. As I said, this is the third of the series. You can find the other two on the Wesley Research Institute YouTube channel if you'd like to review those. Before we begin, we'd just like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yugara peoples, the traditional custodians of the land where Wesley Research Institute now stands, and we pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Today, the plan is to explore how we can all live and socialise a little bit better with people who have celiac disease. Whether you're managing that condition yourself, and some of this information tonight for experienced celiacs will be well known to them, but it may not be as well known to people who are supporting someone with celiac disease. And we here also think that they're important players in their celiac journey. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when people with treated celiac disease are exposed to gluten. And Paula, who's with us tonight, I'll introduce in a second, will share some practical and science-informed strategies about that. We'd also like to thank our partner, the Rosalie Martin event series, which was established in the memory of Rosalie Martin, who was a board member at Wesley Research Institute, and it was through a very generous gift from their family. And the aim of the Rosalie Martin event series is to host advocate events throughout the year to engage the community with the work and impact of work that's done at Wesley Research Institute. So we're very grateful to the Martin family for that. The topic tonight is navigating gluten exposure together. So we all know that the gluten-free diet is a huge burden for people with celiac disease. So we're just looking at strategies around that. That's who I am. And this is Paula. So Paula's a very experienced specialist gastroenterology dietitian. She has 14 years experience at large hospitals in Brisbane. She has expertise in the dietary management, not only of celiac disease, but also inflammatory bowel disease, which includes Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, as well as irritable bowel syndrome, which can occur with any of those diseases. Paula works closely in partnership with myself, with other gastroenterologists and colorectal surgeons. Importantly, I think what sets Paula apart is her evidence-based approach to care, but also her personal lived experience. So in 1998, Paula was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And then in 2015, Paula was diagnosed with celiac disease. So she's in the unique position of knowing what it feels like to be both the patient and the clinician. We're very grateful that she's agreed to give a talk tonight. We will have a short question and answer time at the end. If you have any questions, if you could put them to the Q&A and we'll get through those as they come through. Right, so I'm only speaking for less than 10 minutes is the plan tonight. And we're talking about gluten exposure in treated celiac disease. And why is that important? And like I said at the start, I don't think a lot of this is new for people with celiac disease. They've lived it, they understand it, and if they've been to talks in the past, they probably understand the science. But tonight I'm hopeful that this could serve as a mini reference for friends, families, and relatives of people with celiac disease, so that they can understand why people with celiac disease sometimes behave in the way they do, why they're so vigilant with their diet, and what happens to them if they're exposed to gluten, and what the science is behind that to validate those symptoms that these people are experiencing. So with celiac disease, it can either be undiagnosed or diagnosed. In Australia, only around 30% of people are diagnosed with celiac disease, so the majority are not. If it's undiagnosed celiac disease, and really it's untreated celiac disease, if you're diagnosed, you have the opportunity to be treated or untreated. If you're untreated, it's really like you're undiagnosed. And that group of people remain at risk of complications of their disease. Sometimes they feel well, but they don't realise that things can be burning along in the background. Sometimes they feel unwell. They may not reach their growth potential. They're often iron deplete. Their bones can thin out from osteoporosis. They can have trouble with fertility. And there's a very small but increased risk of a small bowel lymphoma. But that's not the focus of tonight. Tonight we're talking about diagnosed celiac disease and those who are treated. And generally they fall into one of two groups: those who are treated but have ongoing symptoms, and those who are symptom-free. But despite being well treated, they can often still have this experience. And I always put this cartoon up, and I apologise for that, but it's because it resonates so strongly with me when people come and see me with celiac disease, that the social isolation and the burden of a gluten-free diet is very high for them. So we're not only going to try and understand why they feel they need to live in that bubble, but hopefully give some people some understanding of why they're doing that, so that together we can lessen that burden for them. My first experience really with celiac symptoms was nearly 20 years ago, whenever you give therapies for celiac disease, and when you're trying to trial new therapies for this disease other than a gluten-free diet, you often have to give people gluten challenges at the start, where you measure things in their blood, you give them the therapy, then you have to do the same thing at the end. So 20 years ago, we gave people 16 grams of gluten, which in retrospect was a tremendous amount of gluten, and we tend not to give that much now. But what became readily apparent to me is nearly half of the people vomited 1 to 2 hours after we gave them that gluten. One while they were travelling across the Story Bridge. But a couple of years later, this paper came out, and they asked people to divide themselves up into whether they were non-adherent or only partially adherent with a gluten-free diet, or whether they were really strict with their gluten-free diet. And those who are in the partial or non-adherent group, they tended to experience more fatigue and bloating and other symptoms like itchy skin, which you would get from dermatitis herpetiformis, which can go with celiac disease. Those who are really strictly adherent with the gluten-free diet tended to have less of those symptoms, but when they were exposed to gluten, they would experience nausea and vomiting, usually within 60 minutes of doing so. And their symptoms tended to get worse and become more pronounced the longer they had been on a gluten-free diet. So the tighter their gluten control, the longer they've been on the diet, the speedier the onset of their symptoms, and the more severe their symptoms were when they developed them. I'm not going to go through all the immunopathology of celiac disease. We did go through that in the first webinar. So if you want to explore that again, I'd encourage you to go back to that. The second webinar is really about genetics for families. But I will share these 3 slides again. So what is a protein? I think of proteins and things in my simple mind like I would a string of pearls. So amino acids being a pearl, and amino acids are these little bundles of energy that the body absorbs to allow it to grow. So if we put enough amino acids together, we get a peptide. If we put enough peptides together, we get a protein. And gluten is really a collection of hundreds of proteins that are very long. And when humans eat these proteins, we can only digest them to a certain amount. There are certain parts of these gluten proteins that humans simply can't break down any further. And for those of us without celiac disease, that's not a problem. But for those people with celiac disease, those peptides are a problem. The remainder of the amino acid bonds are all broken down and they're absorbed, but these peptides remain. So they're called toxic immunogenic peptides, 1, because they're peptides, 2, because they're toxic to people with celiac disease, and 3, they're immunogenic. So in people with celiac disease, when they're exposed to these, they develop an immune response similar to what people would, for example, if they had an infection. They would get unwell at the time. But celiac disease is not contagious. But anyway, around this time, Jason Tydin, who I'm sure just about everyone knows, was working out what the 3 main immunodominant or toxic peptides in celiac disease were from wheat, rye, and barley. So these were the ones that were able to create most of the immune response. And he and Bob Anderson, when he was in the United States, put those together in what they called the NextVax vaccine. And the idea here was to try and restore people's tolerance to gluten. So they no longer reacted to these toxic immunogenic peptides. And the big difference here was instead of ingesting gluten and having the body break it down and then deal with these peptides, they were being injected directly into the skin. And this is the phase 1 study of that. And really in a phase 1 study, you're just trying to work out a dose. So here we have those peptides being injected rather than eaten. And you can see when they're injected in week 1, 2, and 3, that the patients were developing this cluster of symptoms predominated by nausea and vomiting. So similar to what we were seeing in other places with other studies. And one of the really interesting things about this is those symptoms that they got when they injected peptides were very similar to the symptoms they were getting when they were just being given a gluten challenge. So whether the peptides were being delivered intradermally or whether they were being eaten orally, the symptoms was very similar. So now we could understand that these peptides were probably responsible for the symptoms we were seeing in people with celiac disease. Not only were they getting symptoms, they were releasing cytokines. So cytokines are like the chemical messengers of our body that help direct our immune response to things. So here we have the hours, and this is the rise in these chemical messengers. So you can see now just with 6 grams of gluten, so a third of what we gave, you still have this brisk interleukin-2 release. And interleukin-2 is becoming a major feature of celiac disease. Even with the 3-gram gluten challenge, you would still get these cytokines being released, predominantly interleukin-2. There were also some others. But when people with celiac disease were given a gluten-free challenge, you didn't see that response at all. So now we have symptoms due to the peptides, and we're seeing that the interleukin-2 or the cytokine release is correlating very nicely when people were developing symptoms. So the peptides are resulting in cytokine release and then the vomiting. So that's why it's important for people with celiac disease. So they may be out eating with their friends, but they know that if they get exposed to gluten, in 1 to 2 hours, they're going to be at home unwell, potentially projectile vomiting. So now we can begin to understand why these behaviors are occurring. And from the science perspective, whether we have dietary gluten peptides or they're systemically injected, we end up with these deaminated gluten peptides. They're presented by these special antigen presenting cells. They're seen by T cells. We get that cytokine release I just spoke about, and we get these acute symptoms 2 to 4 hours after, predominated by nausea and vomiting. Celiac is not going to go out and eat a whole bowl of non-gluten-free pasta, but they'll probably do this. And unfortunately, they might get exposed to some of the bread that's been sitting around the table when they're eating with people. And I guess one of the things we've been very interested in here is what effect these tiny amounts have. So as you've seen in the other slides I presented, they've been high doses of gluten, 2 to 5 pieces of bread. Now we're sort of interested in what happens just with a crumb of bread. And that was the other reason why we're interested in that is, as people know, the standards of what is gluten-free around the world vary. So if you're having a standard bowl of pasta in the United States or Europe, you're getting around 3 milligrams of gluten with every bowl. Whereas in Australia, because we have really tight, strict, allowable concentrations of gluten in what's deemed gluten-free, we really aren't getting much gluten exposure at all. And that was the basis of the microgluten challenge study. This is my last slide, and I just wanted to mention that study has now been accepted for publication. So it's very exciting for us here at WRI, and our hope is that with the next webinar, we're able to present those results to you. But without anything further from me, I'd just now like to introduce Paula, and I'll hand you over to Paula. So thank you very much, Paula.
Hi, everyone. I'll just get my screen set up. And thanks, James, for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to come and speak today. It almost feels it's just mind-blowing. I get to work with James clinically every day, but sitting here at the Wesley Research Institute, it's just such a privilege to be around this space and seeing, as a person with celiac disease and a person who cares for people with celiac disease, the exciting research that is going on at this centre. So as James alluded, today is all about, it's not a quick fix of everything of what we could do for tips and tricks, but it's opening that door of some basic things to navigate that world of gluten. It is overwhelming for Amanda, as James alluded to that little bubble. So let's start. So just so that we all are clear, the most recent international guidelines that came out in December last year was the European Society for Celiac Disease, and it's the guidelines of how we traditionally manage people with celiac disease. And still to this day in 2026, we still look at the only effective treatment for people with celiac disease is a lifelong strict adherence to a gluten-free diet. And we know that that's an overwhelming thing that a person with celiac disease has to go through. But I cannot imagine someone with celiac disease not having the support around them that they actually is best practice, which is what the guidelines talk about. A part of those guidelines is actually the essential referral to a dietitian that's experienced in that area of celiac disease. And that's actually not a promotion about myself. That's actually a promotion about my profession. We have the most amazing celiac disease dietitians in my hometown here of Brisbane, throughout the state, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, through Queensland, all the way over to Western Australia, which I know those dietitians are online today, down to Victoria and South Australia, over to Tassie, New South Wales. I can't forget any states, Northern Territory. And then we have this incredible community, which we have connected internationally with Christian Costa in the UK. If you don't follow him, follow him. He's a wonderful person on social media. And Nick Trotter, who both work for the NHS in the UK. I plug that because it is really about what does the dietitian do in this space. I think when we talk about that counselling that is required for a gluten-free diet, it's really about talking about how do we adhere to such a strict diet for the entire part of our life until the amazing James Daveson might find us secure, or someone else in the world finds us secure. And it's also about improving that well-being and really minimizing that inversion or that involuntary gluten exposure. And it's common that we would see people actually continuing to have persistent or recurrent symptoms because of that undetected involuntary exposure to gluten, because they were diagnosed 15, 20 years ago. They were told at bedside to go gluten-free, which we as celiacs know is the most easiest part about being celiac and following a gluten-free diet. So from a dietitian's point of view, we're helping detect that involuntary gluten exposure. And a recent study showed about 40% of those people who are coming into clinics where gastroenterologists are asking us, why is this person still having symptoms? They've told me they're gluten-free. We're not actually being those people to go, you're doing this wrong. We're actually helping people in that area. And obviously the nutrients that can be affected as a side effect as well. So when we talk about some factors that really do actually reduce the ongoing gluten-free diet for people, the most common thing that we would hear is people have absolutely no symptoms. I have silent symptoms. That is a common story, 8, 9, 10 out of 10. So that 80 to 90% of people would commonly report that. And usually when people are commonly reporting that, we're usually just asking those questions around what sort of support that you've had around doing a gluten-free diet. It's all about not receiving the right support at the right time by the right people. You know, having a team around you it's a disease. It's not a lifestyle choice. Having that regular update with your GP, and if we have GPs online, they do this fabulous job of doing screening of pathology. So if your iron's continuously low, and linking in with the gastroenterologist, we know with the guidelines, when people are initially diagnosed, it's our goal, or my goal, to be seeing these people within 30 to 60 days. Well, 30 is the ultimate goal, to see them, to actually help start them journey, and then supporting them, for that first 12 months. We know the compliance to a gluten-free diet increases much higher, to that 70-80% with that support. We hope to not see you again, but we do check in regularly, every yearly. And if you don't have access to people, please reach out to your GP or your local specialist. Obviously, the big ticket item that we're going to talk about today is eating outside of our own environments, going out for dinner, going over to families for Christmas, traveling, going interstate, going away for girlfriends for the weekend, doing the big, 12-month overseas trip, doing the retirement trip. How do you actually navigate that world? Also, there's this population that we do see where people are diagnosed really young, 14 months, 2 years, and their carers have been the people who have been their voice, their manager, the food buyer, the sharer, and then they're transitioning from those adolescent years into adulthood, and they're trying to work out what to do when they get to uni or they start work and their friends want to go out. Then the big one for me is that cost associated to the diet. There's that perceived and actual. And I know gluten-free bread is really expensive. I know that things like pasta can be really expensive, but actually being linked in with individual counselling and support, we're much more than just label reading about not sharing a toast or whatever we're saying to people. We are much more than that. We're about trying to create that diversity and variety in diets as well. So let's go in that little bubble that James was talking about in Amanda's mind. This is what it looks for a person for celiac disease. This is about the constant looking at a cutting board, and our family member is suddenly cutting the gluten-containing products with the gluten-free on the same board, the stress that goes with that, the label reading, the constant label reading and food checking. Our families risking it because they don't want to offend us by asking those questions. Can they eat this? Is this safe for a celiac? Can they have cheese? Can they have milk? And then for people with celiac disease, because those things haven't been checked with those people, us having to say, I can't eat that, I'm really sorry, and then feeling that actual pressure around it. So I love the bubble. I want to bring you into that bubble as well, not just as a celiac, but as a person who actually looks after people with celiac disease. So let's talk about some scenarios. Our first one is one of my favorite ones to do when people are newly diagnosed. And the family member says, okay, my sister has just been diagnosed with celiac disease, and what do I need to do to be a good host? I don't want to get them sick. So let's talk about that. My first question to people is, what do you like to cook? What's the favorite cuisine that you actually like to cook? Is it Thai? Is it Indian? Is it Japanese? What's your family routine? Is it Taco Tuesday? Is it Pizza Friday? Is it roast on a Sunday? Because there's nothing worse when we actually go to think about something gluten-free. Most people who actually care or are cooking something for a person with celiac disease, they go, oh, I need to make that gluten-free. I'll look up a recipe that's gluten-free, and they start to cook something they've never cooked ever before. And that can be very overwhelming. And sometimes a lot of those things are products we've never seen before. So I want to talk about what sort of recipe that I think would be a great one. And it's a very obvious one that might contain gluten. The beautiful lasagna, my Auntie Rosie's lasagna, the most favorite recipe that's shared in a family, lasagna. There's nothing better than that on a really cold night or if you've had a hard day at work. But the most obvious things for this is that there is gluten-containing products in there. Obviously, the most obvious being around the instant pasta and that very obvious plain flour. But if we look at that picture alone, we would think, oh, I can't cook that for my family member. That's too overwhelming. I would like to beg differently. So in saying that, where do we start? So what I would like to talk about when we start is I want to talk about things that actually do contain gluten. The soy sauce, the pasta, the bread, the flour, the beer, the crackers, the gravy, the taco, and things that actually don't contain gluten. And they are the gluten-free soy sauce, pasta, bread, flour, beer, crackers, gravy, and tacos. And yes, they do exist in our actual supermarket. In 2026, yes, we do have a much bigger variety of things out there accessible. So don't feel overwhelmed when you do go to cook something that you're scared about cooking. Firstly, I want to talk about those foods that are naturally gluten-free. So the fresh fruit and vegetables, things that we should have for our health, those raw, unprocessed meats, poultry and seafood, prawns, chicken, beef, eggs. And it doesn't matter if the eggs have eaten any sort of grain either, they're still gluten-free. The natural and minimal processed dairy, cow's milk, cheese, yogurts, fats and oils, so the good old olive oil. Gluten-free grains, corn, quinoa, most of the grains that most celiacs don't even know what they are, but they're things that are actually naturally gluten-free. I'm going to talk about these little two things at the end called nuts and seeds, legumes and lentils, and you'll see there's a little asterisk beside that. And the reason that I've had to put an asterisk on is there is some products that now have a may contain, and we'll talk a little bit about the hot topic later on. So let's go back to the recipe. Auntie Rosie's lasagna. How do we actually choose these things that are actually naturally gluten-free? So if we're talking about those things like fruit and vegetables, we've got some onion, carrot, and fresh cloves of garlic. A really good key to that is just choosing fresh things, and you know that you're actually safe from that side of things. When we move into the raw meats, beef, plain beef mince that's not in a butcher full of gluten-free crumbs. We live in a really quick and easy grab things, but things that are actually packed separately, a gluten-free mince, or if you go to the butcher and you're just asking for the beef that might be out in the back is gluten-free, obviously, but it should be natural. Obviously, the milk, we all have, most of us have some form of milk in the fridge, whether or not it's lacto-free almond milk or normal cow's milk. And then our beautiful selection of cheeses. The amount of times that a celiac person asks, am I still able to eat cheese? It is 100% okay. So the mozzarella or the Parmesan cheese are still okay. Then if we talk about the things that aren't naturally gluten-free, we'll talk about the instant pasta. We'll also talk about a few different things that I want to highlight that are actually coming out of a jar or a packet or a bottle. So a really good key to that is if it's coming out of a jar or a packet, you might need some assistance in that. So we'll talk about the tomato paste, the canned tomatoes, and the chicken stock. The last one is a bit of a controversial one because I've just said if it's a dairy food that is naturally made, the butter, you would think that would be classified. But unfortunately, if we share a house with people who do eat gluten-containing items, the butter becomes a bit of a problem. So how do we actually help people with celiac disease in this space? Like I said, this is basic introductory levels of what we're trying to do of navigating that world of gluten. I must say at this point, this is 30 minutes that I get to talk to you, and that support with celiac disease is built over consults and over years. And we know that that's the most important part. So the ABCs of how to do is ask a celiac friend or family member. Every single person who is celiac is really brand aware. We know how to walk into a supermarket. We know that most of our products are high or low in that actual shelving. We know that now these days, our major supermarkets here in Australia, those products that are gluten-free are blended into all those other items as well. So my first advice is if you're looking for lasagna sheets, ask your celiac friend, because they'll definitely be able to help for you find one. And if they can't, that's a good sign that they probably need some assistance or some guidance. The next one is I want everyone to put their right hand over their eye and actually just tap on their actual brow up here. Now, this is almost what most celiacs do when they have to walk into a house to actually check to make sure that everything's going on. But why we internationally use this acronym is to actually talk about what gluten is, or where gluten is within grains. So gluten is a protein that is within the grains of barley, rye, oats, and wheat. And obviously oats is a bit of a controversial one, but we do include it in that. So every time we're looking at something, we're trying to work out, is there barley, rye, oats, or wheat in it? And the word gluten is the big overarching name of those products. So when we actually are checking those labels, those ingredients, which we'll talk a little bit, the D stands for don't assume or risk if unsure. The amount of times that people are a little bit shy to actually ask a person with celiac disease, I would hear it on a weekly basis. Oh, people just didn't check with me. I could have given them information. I tried to have a conversation and then I couldn't eat that meal. So don't ever assume. Your celiac person is a good person to start with. So the other one that I want to talk about before I get into more detail is going and navigating a supermarket. It is overwhelming for a person who has celiac, as well as people that are preparing a meal for us. We try to feed that framework of read, prepare, ask, read the ingredients. What ingredients do I actually need? Prepare a shopping list, put it together. What do I need and what don't I need? Ask my celiac friend for those products. Most of our supermarkets here in Australia also have ingredients on their actual online shopping things that actually tell us whether or not they have ingredients or allergy spots in it. So let's put it together, that shopping list. So I've realized that I've got the cheese, I've got the beef, I need the onion, garlic, carrot. The butter has been used by my entire family because we're in Australia, Vegemite on toast. So we have to mention Vegemite. The peanut paste was opened. Oh, we used that for the pizzas that we made last Friday night. So we'll need a new one of that. The gluten-free flour and the lasagna, which our celiac friend has told us what brands to use. The items at home already are the simple things: salt, pepper, onion, olive oil, milk, tinned tomatoes, and chicken stock, because we checked that with our actual celiac friend, so we know we've got those things. Why I'm showing that shopping list is remember to prepare before you get to the supermarket. It's really overwhelming to walk in and go, oh, I'm going to cook a lasagna. What do I need? If you've not actually cooked for a gluten-free or a celiac person before. So when we talk about that ingredients list, this is from Coeliac Australia, who is our official body here in Australia, and the UK and all other areas throughout the world do have their own sites. We're talking about ingredients today and the importance of actually the labeling part to it. I always think that here in Australia, we're a farming industry. Our main farming industry is barley, rye, oats, or wheat. That part alone means that a lot of our products, a lot of the time, do have thickening agents around that as well. So we need to actually just read our labels. So most of the products will have a list of ingredients, and they'll have a contain statement, and they will have that may be present or the may contain statement. What we want to be asking ourselves is, one, barley, rye, oats, or wheat, is the word gluten mentioned, which it is, and does it have a may contain statement? And we like to talk about that here in Australia because we know that for our may contain statements, a lot of the time it's a discretionary thing. It's the most argued thing that we would probably do. When people are very symptomatic and they're coming into clinic, sometimes that's the thing that we need to focus on. What sort of products are you actually having at that moment? Also, for the person who's making for that celiac person, it's just better to choose not that option. So if you answer yes to any of the above, it is not safe. If you answer no to all of those questions, it is safe. I love this slide. So living in the world of celiac disease, I know what celiac people will look at, but I want to know why everyone outside of the celiac world goes, Paula, why are you cooking a salad? And I say that because it has been said to me. Now, for a celiac person, when we look at that, we look at the crumbs, we look at the butter, we look at the bread. Is that chopping board actually being washed? What's that knife cut before it's actually started to cook the salad? What's that tea towel doing? Where's it been and what's it been over? And I'm going to use those wooden utensils because we've got some really good evidence around that part as well. I'm going to talk about the spot the difference. And the spot the difference is we know through the evidence of some trials that have happened. Someone was fabulous. They went away and they did, they put gluten containing and gluten-free items, stirred things with wooden spoons, and they measured what those gluten levels were. They used a ladle. They put one in the gluten-free to the gluten-containing items. And the main theme that I would like you to take away from this is if anything is washed in warm soapy water, including those wooden utensils there at the moment, they are safe for a celiac person. If we are wiping down our bench, which most of us would probably do if someone was coming over for dinner, wiping that down, as you'll see, all those crumbs are removed. And we've got a new tea towel out just as a safeguard. And you'll notice that the butter there has also been separated. So have we bought a new element of butter? What I want you to take away from that element is spotting the difference. It is the simple act of when you're preparing something that is gluten-free for a person with celiac, warm soapy water, wiping down that bench, washing our hands as such, and making sure that the chopping boards, the pots, the plates, the saucepans have been washed with warm soapy water or passed through that dishwasher as well. And that's the evidence that we have to support ourselves. And a lot of celiacs already live in a house with gluten lurking around, so that's how we manage it. When we talk about the actual utensils themselves, the first question someone would say, well, the lasagna tray has already had gluten-containing lasagna in that. But once it's washed with warm soapy water or been through the dishwasher, it's good to go. Same with our utensils, our saucepans, everything. Using a cloth to wipe everything down and starting from scratch, like we probably would normally, and washing our hands. Serving that meal, sometimes this can be the biggest disappointing thing for someone who is serving a gluten-free meal. They put everything out, they've gone all to the effort, they've worried about that all day, and then they've gone, oh, but we can't have a lasagna without garlic bread, and we love to put croutons on top of our actual salad. So some good tips and tricks is placing the bread in a separate area and then putting the croutons don't put them on there is a good example of just to help the person with celiac disease. And if you've gone to make something based on a recipe, don't add any toppers at that last minute. So let's talk about my scenario 2. It's my symptoms aren't improving and I'm worried that I'm getting exposed while eating out. How do I eat out with my family and friends while keeping myself safe? So what does the evidence tell us? One of my colleagues down in Melbourne and James as well, Emma Hamos and Jason Tyden, did a fabulous study, which I'd love to do myself, an undercover testing of 127 food businesses around Melbourne here in Australia, and a total of 158 items were tested. And what they found was 1 in every 11 samples of those gluten-free tested were actually contaminated with gluten at levels that would be harmful for people with celiac disease. Another study, which was crowd-sourced, and it's got quite a bit of bias to it because the people who were testing the food could opt in to share their results as opposed to actually sharing the less exciting results as far as being gluten-free and not being detected. But they tested 5,624 meals, and that was performed by 804 users, and 32 of those items were a high risk for people with celiac disease. So what would I say? I'd say I could still go out to eat as well. And why I say that is with that individual counselling that goes with celiac disease. We are so much more than reading of labels. We are talking about helping you and guiding you with the right questions to be able to use. Coeliac Australia and most of our bodies of celiac organisations throughout the world have wonderful resources for our catering industry, our restaurants, cafes. But what I love about this slide is the statistics down the bottom that Coeliac Australia published was 73% of those who need to follow a strict gluten-free diet, aka people with celiac disease, said it was their biggest concern of finding an actual place. And we're lucky here in Australia. We have places predominantly in Melbourne that do have accredited celiac restaurants, which when you sit down, you're getting that sticker on there that reassures you. But it still doesn't frighten a person to go out to eat. And it's about asking those questions. We have celiac disease, and a lot of people, when we're talking to them, have never ever heard that word celiac disease. So we need to almost guide them in a way that we can ask the right questions to get the right answers so we can go and enjoy with our family. So the common causes of gluten exposure when people do go out, and this isn't solely the reasons why, but the lack of dietetic consultation or support to help, the more that we can actually talk and help and support you and run scenarios. And there's wonderful people who are fellow dietitians throughout the world who do these things on social media that really support our community to really up their game around questions. People who solely rely on a gluten-free menu, that solely gluten-free menu is telling us what we can eat and what we can't eat. And I'll give some examples of that. Just saying that, hey, I'm gluten-free, what options do you have? We haven't actually talked about the processes. As we allured, that gluten-free is the easiest part about this journey. Not saying anything, just ordering the food without actually commenting and allowing others to order for us as well, and just not having the confidence to do it. So once again, read, prepare, and ask. So read is about preparing. Everything that a celiac person does in that little bubble is that we prepare to go out to dinner. So the earlier that we know a venue, or if you could ask people with those venues whether or not they might be celiac, or do they have any suggestions as well. Coeliac Australia obviously has some wonderful options on there. Definitely experienced dietitians throughout our beautiful world can give us really good examples, and reliable media sources, sites as well. And I don't mean Facebook interest groups. I'm not saying that they're bad or good, but there's some really wonderful people who have brought out cookbooks who actually have made our life as celiacs that more fun, rather than actually that we want to eat a healthy meal all the time. Sometimes we do actually want a dumpling. The other thing with that is preparing and really looking at that menu and the review of all the foods on that list, not just the gluten-frees. So what is naturally gluten-free, and ask why it's labelled gluten-free. And I'm going to use an example that I heard recently. It's a slow-cooked lamb served with a Greek salad with a pita bread, but it's not labelled gluten-free. But the simple questioning around, can this item be made gluten-free by the removal of the pita bread? And that can be made because the person's gone out and might have checked with the chef and said, yes, that slow-cooked lamb was cooked in an oven, which is okay to do that. We can have food in items. It wasn't cooked with anything else, and we're able to make a fresh salad for you as well. And suddenly you've got a delicious meal in front of you. It's about calling ahead, ask those questions, communicating clearly. I know what I'd like to order, but can I double check a couple of processes? Is the steak cooked on the same grill as the gluten-containing burger buns? Can the steak or whatever protein be cooked in a separate fry pan? Just simple things that we can help you with to prepare and ask those questions can make a really big difference. It's the hidden support that sits behind our safe dining. And I've used these examples because we know here in our community here in Brisbane, there's restaurants that have a head chef that is celiac. We know the owner's family member has celiac disease. They genuinely care about our community, and they don't have any members of celiac disease in their family or friends. They know someone affected or a staff member has been diagnosed. The stories, I can't tell restaurants or brands through this, but they are out there, and knowing what questions to ask is the key. And this is where that individualized counselling builds confidence. So the third scenario is, I love this one. I'm heading to Europe on a long-awaited retirement holiday. I've worked so hard to get my bowel. How do I ensure I don't go backwards? What I think about this scenario is, let's flip it, because I think once you've actually got that support around you, it's the excitement of the planning of the holiday that is the most exciting part. Rather than actually thinking that it's a negative thing, we can do some things to support around there. So it's definitely around that read, prepare, and ask, and seeking assistance. Some things that we need to consider in particular is ordering a gluten-free meal on a flight. I'd probably like to mention that some of the best airlines at the moment are Emirates and Qatar, but I'm not sure if any of us are going via there at the moment. But in saying that, they do offer meals that probably are more celiac friendly to a level as well. Some of our other airlines only offer a gluten intolerant and definitely have very clear statements. They might contain traces. And what does that mean for us? We then can help around those food items that you can and you can't take on a flight. What do you put on your as a hand luggage, and what do you put in your check luggage? Can you take a sandwich on? Can you take a salad on? Can you actually take enough snacks to get you through to a 16-hour flight to the States, for example? What sort of items? Can you take a little lunchbox pack that actually has a brick in it, a little thin frozen brick? It can be allowed to be taken through customs. That emergency food kit that you travel with. And I know that if my own clients are sitting online, they know that this is one of my favorite things to talk about. The hardest thing for us to actually find when we're in places in Europe is that filling up thing. We're out exploring beautiful Paris and going down the Champs-Elysees, and we're going to the Eiffel Tower, and we've got to find something to eat, but we're hungry. What can we have as an emergency pack in our backpack that we can actually prepare something pretty quickly? And there's many items that you can think about. But when you're preparing for a holiday, think about what those things can be. A travel letter, if you're going on a tour, you're going on that once in a lifetime cruise or riverboat or first class travel around Europe, or doing a Kentucky backpacking or just backpacking around Europe. Having that information, actually sharing that with people is really important. And obviously, there's sites in each. We have celiac bodies in each of these countries. The UK celiac site had a wonderful travel section where we could click on and we could look for supermarkets and brand awareness in a lot of the European countries, which was fantastic. So the ideas are endless. When I think of travel and I think of a person coming in to get that assistance with travel, I think about what could they do rather than what can't they do. Can they sail the Mediterranean Sea or go down on a riverboat on a celiac-friendly cruise? Can they do a celiac walking tour of Barcelona? Can they visit the world-famous 100% amazing supermarket in Rome? Can we have a cheeseburger at the Golden Arches in Italy, Norway, Netherlands, and Spain? I can't use their name, but you know what I'm talking about. Travel companies that put together beautiful, celiac-friendly tours without those hassles. French patisseries in Paris that are 100% gluten-free to have that croissant we've all been waiting for. The supermarket names and local brands, Michelin star restaurants. Don't ever think that celiac disease is a barrier to do any of these things. It's the support that you're getting. It's the people that are on this webinar, the GPs, the other specialists, the other dietitians that can create a community to help us, work through what it means to navigate that world of celiac disease. And in saying that, one day I hope that I never have to actually talk about navigating the world of celiac disease. And I deeply thank the Wesley Research Institute in particular for the endless work that they do in this space. And I know that there's always a plug for donations, and it is so important to keep that going to support our community. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paula. I really invited Paula along tonight because I'm not a celiac. So although I clinically see a lot of people with celiac disease, the whole gluten-free food can be a challenge for me as well. And as you all know, it can be socially isolating. And even with the strict gluten-free diet, people can still develop symptoms. But it is the only treatment we currently have. There are a lot of studies going on to try and change that. There's a lot of therapies being trialled currently, which we've been involved in here. And clearly trying to understand how the body responds to gluten continues to be a focus for researchers everywhere. I just wanted to touch on a few questions. There's been quite a few coming through, Paula. But before I do that, if you are interested in being involved in clinical studies at Wesley Research, or you'd like to make a donation, show your support, I'm sure there's a web page that everyone will direct you to where you can do that. With the questions that have come through, I just wanted to ask you, Paula, a couple of quick ones if I could. So my take-home message is when we are eating out or when we're looking to go out to a restaurant with people that have celiac disease. So one of the main things you're saying is find the Celiac Australia accredited restaurant. I'm not sure how many of those exist, but I'll be grateful of your knowledge about that. And then one of the big things is if you know the people behind the scenes at the restaurant, that's obviously important. But apart from that, you would then call up. You'd get the menu beforehand, you'd call up and you ask them to change it if you need it changed. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the biggest risk a lot of the time is that people are selecting things that are just gluten-free on a menu. A restaurant might actually be, coming across that they're really gluten-free friendly, but a lot of the time they're still sharing the same fries. They're not watching that cross-contamination. And it's really about the questions that we ask. So going back to the accredited restaurants, they are very limited here in Brisbane, where we are located. And I don't know how many total there are in Melbourne. I think nationally, maybe 100, 150 of them at the most, but most of those are multiple locations of the same brand, such as donuts as such. But how I look at it is if people have enough confidence and they're asking the right questions, it allows us to open the conversation around you're passing through a small area or a small town, if it's English speaking. So just here in Australia, we'll talk about that. And it's a family cafe, for example, and we walk in and we say to the person, I can see that you're actually got some grilled chicken on the menu. Is it possible for that grilled or that piece of chicken to be cooked in a fry pan that's been washed? And a lot of places will say, yeah, that's absolutely not a problem. And then I might actually allure to, I have celiac disease, so would it be possible for you to actually change your gloves and just use some clean utensils? And as you can see, it's leading the conversation rather than me saying, do you have any chicken or salad on your menu? And I have celiac disease, and relying on a person, yourself, James, and many people in our community, when you mention the word celiac disease, in most cases, a lot of people have never ever heard that word. And when we're walking into restaurants, cafes, any of those things, people have never heard that word. And I think as celiacs, we're trying to, or people who helping people with celiac disease, we're trying to actually build that confidence to go, in our little bubble, we know what we need to look for when we actually go out. We need to build that confidence and know exactly what sort of questions. If I'm about to go in and order a place that is most famous for steak, and that's what I'm there for, one of those key questions is if I know that that steak is actually being cooked on a grill, my first thing that we would be helping people to say is what else is going onto that grill. And then if you're at home and you were cooking that barbecue at home and someone had been using that for a gluten-containing product, you know yourself as a celiac person what you would do to change that. And it's giving people that confidence to actually go out, that I think I'm trying to allude to. There's no barrier to where we go out. There's certainly pizza, pasta, places that we would not step into, but I think we need to almost then get that confidence to be able to use our words, to be able to then know those tips and tricks of what we can do when we go out. And I know that's what a lot of dietitians all over the world are trying to help our community to step out of that little bubble and go, you know what, it's okay to actually eat out, and it's okay to actually give people some simple instructions that actually allows them to actually talk about what that is. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Paula. And I guess one of the other things was, for me now, I have a recipe for lasagna, so I can ask people around with celiac disease and follow your tip. But there's been a few comments that when people are inexperienced about making gluten-free foods, they tend to go out and buy the substitutes that people with celiac disease don't particularly like. And they
So that goes back to that tip of ask a friend, ask your celiac friend. You know, I think too, we make food because it's our way of sharing care and love, and just actually reaching out to that person. That celiac bubble is full of a lot of brands, and we know exactly where a lot of things in that supermarket are. And it's usually we can say, this is the brand that I really like, and this is where you can get it from. And it's also about not buying those expensive items, going back to that perceived and actual cost. A lot of the time people will say with the lasagna, oh, I better go to that Italian deli that sells that really expensive gluten-free lasagna sheets, when in fact the one that I really like is just in the supermarket. And by the way, it's on sale at a particular supermarket this week. And so then the cost, you know, relativity around that is a big saving, because I see that a lot of people, when they come in, they're quite overwhelmed with the cost, and it is about breaking down and going, but hang on, let's go back to the supermarket and what is available in those actual aisles. So that support becomes extremely important.
And I'll just ask one more question, and then I'll try and just address a few of the ones that have come through. But the final scenario is that I'm interested in those when you have kids, right? And there was a question that flicked up about this. So a 16-year-old who, I think it must have been the parents, saying they tend to not go to that event so they don't have to run the risk of being exposed to gluten, which is terrible. But equally, I've had a sporting team where there's been one of the kids that's had celiac disease, and you certainly don't want them to feel excluded. So you want an option that suits everyone, not just an option for so many and something for someone else. Do you have any quick tips about that?
So almost with the 16-year-old, I guess going to an event is what you mean, like going to a family event or going out for a special occasion at someone's 40th birthday if they're 16. Is that what you mean?
I think it was more generic than that. I was thinking, from what I'm just trying to find the question again, but a young person who it might have been sport or it might have been something else, but instead of going and being at risk of eating what was being provided and becoming ill, they were avoiding it altogether.
Yeah, it's that as a person who supports celiac just honestly breaks my heart to hear that, because you know, with that tiny little bit of collaboration, I think too, as a part of a sporting group, and we talk about these, it's the restaurants, the cafes, it's the hospitals. When people come into hospitals, it's sporting events, going to the football on a Friday night and not having an option there. Is that it's that bubble with people of celiac disease. It's a bit of a pressure, and it's the fear of having to use their words as well. A way around that, I think, is I think if it's a sporting group, as a parent, do you have a conversation with that coach or manager or the school? Is there some options that could be actually added to that post-celebration? As a parent, is it that element of we are very good at bringing the sweet and savoury items to family events to allow that freedom to be able to eat? Is there something that they can help to there? Or is it actually just sharing some information around, listen, this place is actually really good. You could get some chicken and chips from there if that's something that the family at the sporting group is doing or the family do on a regular basis. I think it's almost having those conversations is the hard thing. It's hard for a 16-year-old to have those conversations. And I think that's where I would say that the parent needs support as well, because without that support, that 16-year-old turns into a young adult in their early 20s, and they might end up at university and really struggling to be able to live on campus to get support as well. So building skill early is good.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. Well, I think we're rapidly running out of time, but I wrote down a few questions as they were coming through. There's a question about adult onset celiac disease in someone who'd recently travelled overseas. So while I think we feel most celiac disease probably is evident in children or occurs in children, the average age of diagnosis of celiac disease is 30 in Australia. So it may be that it's a delayed diagnosis. And thinking about testing people who are high risk for celiac disease early on may negate that delay in diagnosis. Having said that, there are viruses that have been implicated in the with celiac disease, so enterovirus, rotavirus. The initial description by Samuel G actually mentioned celiac disease seemed to occur in children, but children who had been abroad seemed to be at particular risk. So the person's comment about having travelled to India, getting gastroenteritis, coming back and having a new diagnosis of celiac disease is certainly something we see in the clinic.
Yeah.
In terms of therapies for celiac disease, my comments about therapies for celiac disease is the need for evidence-based therapies. So we can have supplements, but evidence-based therapies need to go through a rigorous process of phase 1, 2, and 3 studies. And they need to be not only prove that they improve symptoms for people with celiac disease, but they actually work in terms of helping the pathology people with celiac disease can develop. There are multiple therapies going through that phase of development now. So there's phase 1, 2, and 3. Several of these are now in phase 2 or getting close to being in phase 2. There's phase 2 studies occurring in Queensland for new therapies for celiac disease. Most of the therapies you can divide up into therapies that reduce the gluten load. So reduce the gluten load once it's in the gut, improving the barrier between the gut and where all the immune process happens just underneath it. Turning off some of those acute immune reactions that happen once the gluten goes across the intestinal wall, and then reducing people's tolerance to restoring their tolerance to gluten. So changing the way they see and react to gluten. In terms of associated immune diseases, there are many autoimmune diseases that run with celiac disease. So thyroid disease, type 1 diabetes obviously is more easily diagnosed when people are younger. Dermatitis herpetiformis, autoimmune hepatitis. So if we're not diagnosed with celiac disease, then we're not necessarily looking for those associated diseases that can run with it. Equally, we do see people develop celiac disease and then other diseases such as Crohn's disease or diseases with their esophagus. There are things we look out for all the time. In terms of lactose intolerance, yes, people can describe lactose intolerance, particularly early on in their diagnosis of celiac disease. The lactase, which is important for the absorption of lactose, sits in the tips of the villi, and if we don't have villi, we have to wait for those to grow back. Lactase is a good supplement for that. What else? I think that's probably about it. I think we've pretty much run out of time anyway. But again, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. I'd really like to extend my thanks to Paula. I think obviously the gluten-free diet is incredibly important in this space. there are a lot of new novel therapies for celiac disease, and anyone who'd like to be involved in those studies, I'd encourage you to register your interest